Good morning, everybody, and welcome to NFL, the strategy show. And we've got, once again, as people have pointed out in the chat here, it is the New York Jets playing on an island game for, I don't know what, if the Jets have played 8 games this year, what would you say, Matt? 10 of them have been island games in primetime so far this year. The Jets very busy in some of the primetime games. The NFL really wanted to highlight them with Aaron Rodgers coming back this year, and they're 2-6. It's gone very poorly for the Jets. It's gone poorly for the NFL with the Jets being in these primetime games. We got another one today. They're taking on the Texans. The Jets are actually 2.5-point favorites. Loughy out this morning. Big discussion going on behind the scenes. Is he a pussy? Is it warranted? Only time will tell. So big deal going on right now because Loughy getting an MRI done. He got injured in a beer league hockey game. And Matt and I were discussing, if this isn't a significant knee injury here, then we really have to call his toughness into question. Because if you're calling out to get an MRI done and nothing ends up happening, well, then your medal has to be really, really called into question here. So Loughy's getting the MRI done. And serious, hopefully it is nothing. It would certainly mean that we make fun of him for it, but hopefully he's okay. Nothing all that significant. As you guys are watching this, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm joined here by my friend, Matt Gajewski, who we hadn't done a show together in a minute. Now, 2 football shows in a row together for us. What's up, Matt?
Ready for another Jets game? I also am a little confused by this. I don't know why the NFL wouldn't try to spread their chips around a little bit. Maybe it's helpful for the Jets if they keep playing like Thursday night for rest and stuff. But man, when you have a team that's expected to be good and then they suck, run into the situation, you're just like doubling and tripling down on like unexciting games. That doesn't really matter, I guess, for me because I love Showdown. And this game is actually very interesting with some of the injuries we have. There's a lot of uncertainty, which are my favorite games to play. But yeah, man, we're definitely getting acquainted with the Jets.
Yeah, and we know a lot of the ins and outs of the Jets. They have added players since the season started. Like we got Devontae Adams in the mix. He has been a total non-difference maker for the Jets. They just lost to the Patriots a few days ago. And we've also got some other movement for the Jets, which is going to potentially be significant for Showdown. Well, actually it will be because we do have a situation here where Greg Zuerlein, Jets kicker, really has struggled so far to open up the year. He's been placed on the injured reserve. The Jets signed a couple of kickers. It looks like Riley Patterson is going to be the starter for them tonight at kicker. So in the initial runs of our sims, we do have Greg Zuerlein in our projections, but he's priced the same as Riley Patterson. So basically, when we see Greg Zuerlein's name, we're going to assume that means Riley Patterson, and then our data will be updated probably even during the time that we're on this show to reflect the change at starting kicker here for the New York Jets. But before we start talking about the Showdown slate, Matt, I want to ask you, what do you make of the Jets being favored by 2.5 points against the Texans, who are one of the better teams in the AFC?
Yeah, it's eye-opening. I think it comes from the Texans, although they've been pretty good, still not quite living up to expectation. They have a few injuries, but still, it's not anything that, I guess, outside of receiver that I'm really that worried about. And then with CJ Stroud back there, we've seen him perform well with some backup receivers in the past. Last year, the receiving core was pretty weak at times once Tank Dell got hurt. And now, funny enough, he's really the last man standing. But I think some of their offensive struggles are more structural and not even who's on the field. They've given up a lot of pressure, which has been surprising. And they've been extremely run heavy, especially on early downs, which has been a problem for the team overall. And a lot of people argued at the beginning of the season they would go more pass heavy because of their player personnel. They just haven't done that. And now with the injuries, I don't think they really have a choice. They're going to remain a run-based team. As far as that pertains to this game, I'm still surprised the Jets are favored. But at the end of the day, how many games do the Jets have that they've lost by single digits? Almost every single one. I think they have 3 losses by 3 points exactly. While their record is pretty bad, they've been right there in games, coin flips, if you will. 1 or 2 things goes right in those contests. We could be talking about a very different Jets team.
Yeah, if we look at the Jets games so far this year, to your point, Matt, they lost in week 1 to the San Francisco Giants on the road in San Francisco. Really no shame in that loss. That was the one they lost by 13 points. Then they beat Tennessee. They beat New England. Very non-inspiring, unimpressive wins, but wins nonetheless. Then they lose by 1 point to Denver. They lose by 1 score to Minnesota. They lose by 1 score to Buffalo. They get blown out by Pittsburgh. And then the narrow loss to New England last week. So I hear what you're saying as well. This team is 2-6. Clearly not a great team, but the losses, for the most part, have been narrow. It's not like they're going out there and losing to the Patriots by like 2 touchdowns or anything like that. It was a close competitive game. They lost at the wire. I think, what was it? Patriots scored with like 3 seconds left on the clock or whatever it was last week. So they have been in competitive games. It's not to say I think the Jets should be like 10-point underdogs or anything against the Texans. It's just surprising to see a 2-6 team coming off a loss to the New England Patriots, the assumed worst team in the NFL. And all of a sudden you got the Jets against one of the better teams in the NFL, 2.5-point favorites, but certainly going to be influenced by what you mentioned with just a terrible situation as far as the pass catchers are concerned for the Houston Texans, where you got Nico Collins. He's not expected back until week 10. Stephon Diggs, he's out for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. They traded a 2nd-round pick for Diggs, and what, they get 7.5 games out of him. So that's why you see somebody like Deontay Johnson, when he only has a few games left on his contract, not get traded for a lot. It's just like, look at the Stephon Diggs situation. Trade for him before the year, blows out the knee, you only get a few games out of him. But it's going to form a lot of interesting discussion points, as well as who it is that we're going to be wanting to target in DFS for this slate. But let's start by talking about the quarterbacks here, Matt. And I want to ask you this right away. Aaron Rodgers has not, do you know how long it's been since Aaron Rodgers has had a 300-yard passing game, by the way?
2020.
It's been a while.
I think it was 2020.
It was, yes, you are. Yeah, it was on December 12th of 2021 against the Chicago Bears.
It's my brother's birthday, and he likes the Bears. What a shame.
Well, his Bears lost to Aaron Rodgers 45-30, and that was the last real meaningful output that we've seen from Aaron Rodgers as far as a ceiling game, as far as passing is concerned. And as far as CJ Stroud goes, we know the kind of ceiling he has throwing the football, but considering you just said that you are expecting the Texans to go a little bit more run heavy, considering how the offensive line has looked in pass protection, then also you got Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs out. And then when you compare that to some of the struggles of Aaron Rodgers to generate fantasy upside, who's your preferred QB to roster today? Is it Aaron Rodgers or is it CJ Stroud?
I think it's still CJ Stroud, just based on the upside we've seen from him recently. I mean, we've seen 300 yards this year. It's definitely fewer and far between, and his fantasy output has been way below expectation compared to what we thought we were going to get coming into the season. His 2 300-yard games came against Jacksonville and Buffalo. I guess Buffalo is a fairly respectable defense, very hurt defense, but at least we've seen it twice this year. But you hit on something. I don't really want to get a ton of these QBs with some of the skill position players and the price points we have to pay for both signal callers, especially Stroud. 10K is pretty exorbitant for a player who's been very underwhelming this year. Like he hasn't even been in like the top 12 quarterbacks in fantasy scoring. So this price tag is just a little bit egregious on him, and Rodgers has been even worse. So the price tags on both of them, I think, are just a little too expensive when you look at the alternatives. And that mainly comes from the run game. We have 2 absolute stud running backs, and they should be priorities, which I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, and then also related to that and the lack of upsides, we were talking about which QB we'd rather roster. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards CJ Stroud, despite the more expensive price tag, just because I do think there's more of a ceiling there for him from Rodgers. But as far as the captain options are concerned, or MVP on FanDuel, I don't really want to be playing Rodgers or CJ Stroud in those multiplier spots, just because I do think it's so unlikely that these guys have a massive ceiling for this game. So I don't know that there's going to be a slate-breaking game from one of them. Certainly more likely to come from Stroud than Rodgers, in my opinion. But I'm going to be prioritizing other positions in the captain spot. And it sounds like, based on how you're talking, it's kind of the same for yourself, Matt.
It is. And I think we see this in our sims too. We'll talk about the running backs in a second. But when you just look at captain, it was slanted heavily their direction and then just kind of spread. A little bit of the quarterbacks, a little bit of the receivers. There's some kickers, some defenses, receivers at all price points, a little bit of tight end, which is kind of what I thought it would be coming in and what I was hoping to get. So it's nice to see that borne out. We're in agreement. The problem, I think, with quarterback at captain is you just run into the situation where you're not getting a lot of volume off. You have some running, or you have some receivers that should be clear target getters. And when you have those and it's not super spread and your QB doesn't run, there's just a pretty good chance, especially on DraftKings with the bonuses, that you just get outscored by your receiver, even if your QB has a productive game because of the scoring format. I think that's especially true with Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. And I think you could argue that with Tank Dell. Like they don't have anyone else who really commands targets right now, and I'm not sure Dell even does.
Yeah, and it's also fair to question how much the injury has impacted Tank Dell this year, because he was terrific for a while last year, where he was looking like one of the steals of the draft as far as best ball. When you were like halfway through the season, you would consider Tank Dell steal of the draft, somebody you were going to maybe have to have down the stretch of the season. And then he broke his leg in that horrific injury, and he just hasn't quite been the same this year. There's a couple of things you could equate it to. Could it be that there's, Nico Collins has taken a step forward. He's been on the field, and he's legitimately one of the top 5 or so best wide receivers in the NFL. They also added Stephon Diggs. So is it just been that there's just too many mouths to feed, and that's impacted Tank Dell? I think that's part of it. But I also, tell me unless you totally disagree, Matt, I think the injury also might be playing a part in it.
Yeah, it could be. It's hard to say. They had 2 really good receivers for the early part of the year. I think it's harder to explain away at this point when you're competing with Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, Robert Woods. I would still expect, Diggs to command more targets, but I don't know. Dell has been close to some plays, just narrowly missed on a few deep downfield targets. But yeah, I mean, it has been optimistic. I guess the best thing you can say is they're running out of alternatives.
If it doesn't happen for him this week, then I don't know when it is going to happen for him. Struggling Jets team, all of the other pass catchers out. At the very least, it should be a significant target share game for Tank Dell. Like, he doesn't even get the targets tonight. Then I don't even know what to make of him going forward. But at least as far as the quarterbacks go, it's just not ones that I really want to be playing in that multiplier spot. We'll be paying up for other guys in that spot. Starting at the running backs here, Matt, where first thing I noticed when I ran an initial run of our sims, almost exclusively getting to running backs in the captain spot over on DraftKings, where I have north of 30% exposure to both Breece Hall and Joe Mixon in that captain spot on DK, and no other player in more than 10% of lineups. So if we are paying up for anybody today, is it correct to say that Mixon and Breece Hall are going to be the top 2 overall pay up options?
I think so. I have a preference to Mixon. He's just not sharing any work in the backfield. Breece Hall, it ebbs and flows with Braylon Allen. Some games, Braylon Allen's not involved at all. Other games, he's operating as a 1B to Breece Hall's 1A. So I think you just have more security with Mixon, even if they're slight underdogs and on the road in this spot. But they're both amazing plays. They're the top 2 plays on the slate for a good reason. The only thing that's going to get me off of them is if the ownership comes way up. Like, you can't discount the pass catching for either back. They're insulated from negative game script. They've both been explosive. The workloads are both good. It's better for Mixon, but not by a lot. So yeah, I mean, these are the first 2 guys in my lineups right now, whether it's cash, low risk, or high risk tournaments. How you want to play them, I think, is a different story. But right now, as long as ownership remains somewhat consistent, I'm going to be trying to get at least one of them in the captain in most of my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Mixon has just been terrific this year for the Texans. He's been a workhorse as well. To your point, you don't have the concerns about like a Braylon Allen coming in for the Texans in the same way. Like Damian Pierce, whoever it's been that has also Ogunbowale that's also gotten snaps out of the backfield for the Texans, they've generally been terrible. Like, I remember there was a point in time where people were like, oh, Ogunbowale versus Cam Akers, and like, where did that lead to? That debate where like Ogunbowale's averaging like 1.8 yards per carry, and Cam Akers got traded for a 6th or 7th round pick. So there really hasn't been any competition in the backfield for Joe Mixon. The running back situation for the Jets has been really difficult for me to figure on a week-to-week basis, Matt, because I feel like for myself, the weeks I've been on Breece Hall, all of a sudden he's splitting workload with Braylon Allen. Then the weeks that I'm not on Breece Hall, Braylon Allen gets like 2 carries and it's all Breece Hall. So I have not been on the right side of the Jets backfield situation. I know you had also said that Braylon Allen kind of has come and gone out of the backfield, but is there anything you've seen that helps us maybe to predict when it might be a Braylon Allen game? Does it matter that they're playing on a short week? Is that something that might lend itself to a little bit more snaps for Braylon Allen, or is it just kind of randomness?
People say that, on the short weeks, you get the backup involved a little bit more. I don't really think that's true. I think if you want to win games, you just give your best players the ball as much as you can. But yeah, I mean, that was a pretty weird game, and it wasn't a blowout or anything like that for the Jets. There's not really anything narrative-wise you can look to where you're like, oh, maybe this is why Braylon Allen got more work. It just seems like certain games they have plans to get Braylon Allen more involved in some spots. And he's been good. I mean, I can't really fault them for doing that. Just sucks when I'm like you're on Breece Hall and then you see Braylon Allen in at the goal line or something. It just is what it is. I think at this point in time, you kind of have to middle this and expect Braylon Allen to get like 20% of the snaps. Last 4 games, 26%, 19%, 9%, then 31 last week. And that's why it's frustrating. You have 9 to 31. How do you project that moving forward? So I think you just come into this assuming Braylon Allen is going to be a change of pace. And even though Breece might not have the same workload as Mixon, it's still going to be very good.
If there's like a little bit of a narrative that I feel like could come into play here that might get the Jets to lean a little bit more on Breece Hall, this is desperation time for the Jets. They might have to run the table to make the playoffs, especially because one of the teams they're competing with, a couple of teams they're competing with a playoff spot could be the Pittsburgh Steelers, could be the Denver Broncos. The Jets have lost to both these teams. So if they're tied with them in the standings, the Jets lose out on a playoff spot. I don't think the Jets could afford to lose any more games the rest of the season. At a bare minimum, they have to win all but one game. If they lose 2 games, they're certainly done for the year. They probably have to win the rest. Maybe they could afford one more loss, but 2-7 would be a disastrously bad start for them. So with that in mind, I think that might have them leaning a little bit more on Breece Hall in a really high leverage game here against the Houston Texans. I don't know for sure. I'm just kind of saying like, hey, if I'm in this situation and I know that I'm coaching, my job is on the line here. You got an interim coach with the Jets. You lean on the veterans that you probably feel are your best options to give you the win for this particular day. And then whatever happens next week, I think you just take it, week by week. But this is basically a must-win game for the Jets. And I think that would have them leaning a little bit more on Breece Hall. But either way, with Braylon Allen lurking in the backfield as well, my preference is a little bit more towards Joe Mixon. But these are the 2 players I get the most exposure to as spend-up options, Matt, and nobody else is even really close.
Yeah, the only pushback I have on that is I thought that exact same thing last week, and then they didn't do it. So I agree with that notion. It makes a ton of sense what you're saying, Greg. And then for some reason they didn't do that. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I wonder if they just thought it was like inconceivable they would lose to the Patriots, and they were almost looking ahead to this Thursday's game, just being like, "Hey, this game is a W. We're getting the ship righted, and then we have to gear up for the big Texans game last week." And maybe that was a part of it too, where they thought like, "Hey, we'll give Braylon Allen some of the goal line touches, so we don't have as much wear and tear on Breece Hall for the Thursday game." And then they just lose the game outright to the Patriots, and then maybe they have regrets about not giving Breece Hall a couple more touches last week. But let's look at some of the backups now, because we talked a little bit about Braylon Allen and how he's going to be involved. Also, if you guys haven't done yet, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We do also have a promo going on that just recently started, so I'll tell you guys about that in a second here as well after we finish walking through these running backs. But starting with Braylon Allen, we talked about he's going to be involved to some extent for the Jets today. Is it enough for you to want to get to him as a value option on DraftKings or FanDuel?
I have some tepid interest, and it's more the 150. I want to sprinkle him just for some differentiation. But kind of one of the big metas of this slate is we have to gamble on who we think is going to play the Texans wide receiver 3 position. Are they going to use more 12 personnel? And I think the way you want to attack the Jets is through the air. So I have some interest in those guys. When you have some value options that might be working into like a legitimate role in the offense, I think it brings me away from Braylon Allen a little bit, especially considering the workload's just all over the place for him in recent games. Everyone's going to love the 12 carry game in their last contest. Prior to that, 2 carries, 3 carries, 5 carries, 8 carries. You're buying pretty high. It's not an exorbitant salary, but right now I find myself generally down in like the John Mechie, the Robert Woods, the Xavier Hutchinson range.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not really a knock against Braylon Allen, but he's $4,400 on DraftKings, a little bit more expensive than that on FanDuel. And we've got all of these value wide receivers for the Houston Texans that are projecting pretty comparably to Braylon Allen, but are just cheaper. I don't know exactly who it's going to be for Houston, and we're going to go through it, and maybe you'll be able to help guide me in the right direction when we get to the pass catchers. But with no Stephon Diggs and no Nico Collins, somebody's going to draw targets outside of Tank Dell, and that to me is going to be the key to unlocking this slate. It's not going to be, one of the down the roster pass catchers for the Jets. I don't think it's going to be Braylon Allen. It could be if he gets the goal line work, but I think the most likely scenario is it's going to be one of these guys who are stepping up for the Houston Texans. Houston Texans backfield, it's been Joe Mixon who's gotten pretty much all of the workload there. Is there anything that you think is worth talking about or catches your eye as far as backups are concerned in the Houston backfield?
Absolutely not. Daria Gumbawale is like a pass blocking specialist. I would set his over under at 1.5 touches per game, and I'm not sure another running back gets a snap.
I think that's a reasonable assumption. Even if somebody else gets a snap, we can't even be confident that it's going to be like Ogunbowale. They've tried so many different guys in the backfield this year that they could end up going in a different direction. So it's like somebody who's probably not going to be all that heavily involved. And then it's even guesswork who that guy is going to be. So yeah, I think the place to find value is going to be with the cheap pass catchers for the Houston Texans, not necessarily the backup running backs. Anything else you want to talk about for players out of the backfield, Matt?
I don't think so. Dameon Pierce is out. So if you guys are all probably aware of that, but just in case you're not, that's why we're talking about Daria Gumbawale.
Yeah. And Pierce, how many games has Pierce even been active for this year now? Like two?
Two, I think. Yeah, two.
Yeah. So it is not gone well for him. Ogunbowale, like we mentioned before, he's been one of the least efficient backs in the league. Cam Akers actually started a handful of games, and then they saw a few games at him like, well, we need him off of our roster. So it has been bleak in the backfield for the Houston Texans, other than Joe Mixon, who's having probably the best year of his career running the football so far. Told you guys we got a little bit of a deal going on right now. I'm going to tell you guys what that is. We had a sub win $1 million on Sunday. It was, here, Jordan's throwing it up on screen right here. But we had Rick12324. That is his DraftKings handle. He is a Bunt Cakes over on Twitter. He won $1 million on Sunday, which is a pretty good haul. I wouldn't mind winning $1 million. And because Rick ended up winning that $1 million, we're running a sale in his honor here. If you sign up for any of our NFL packages using the promo code MIL, and you can just sign up using the link down below in the YouTube description box, you can check out our different packages. If you want to enter that promo code MILL, 30% off any package here for football at Stokastic. So if you want our core package, if you want our max package, if you want a weekly, if you want a monthly, any of it, whatever it is you decide, 30% off, and give yourself a chance to win $1 million, like our friend Bunt Cakes here. Came in first place in the Millie. He used a combination of the tools on the site as well as some of the advice on the NFL Live Before Lock show. I think he'd asked Ben a question about if he was going to, I think actually it was related to Breece Hall. I think he asked Ben if he wanted to fade Breece Hall, who would be the pivots to make, and they went over some of those options, and he took some of that advice, made some alterations to the Sims, favorited his top lineups, and then boom, won $1 million. And if you guys want to sign up for the tools that Rick used to take home the Millie, sign up, link below, promo code MIL, get yourself 30% off any package that you choose to sign up for the football season. Back to tonight's slate here, Matt, and now over to the wide receivers. And just right away, let's start on the Houston Texans side. Stephon Diggs leaves the game last week with a knee injury, ends up being that he's got a torn ACL. He's out for the season. We know Nico Collins is still out dealing with that hamstring issue. So Tank Dell is going to be the number one overall wideout in all likelihood tonight for the Houston Texans. Who do you expect to draw the second most targets as far as wide receivers are concerned outside of Tank Dell for Houston?
So that doesn't include Dalton Schultz, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about Dalton Schultz separately.
He would be the answer if we were just talking pass catchers. For straight up wide receivers, I think it's Xavier Hutchinson. And I don't feel good about this, but he just plays significantly more than any other pass catcher on this team at wide receiver. It's not even close, and it hasn't been close all year. I don't know, man. They're going to run more 12 personnel, but I'm expecting around 60-ish% of the snaps for Hutchinson. Last week, Diggs played 54% before he left with an injury. Hutchinson's been at least 60% in 3 of the last 4 games. He's not good at earning targets, but I think that's just a product of having Schultz, Diggs, and Dell on the field. Now, I don't know. Hypothetically, you'd think he rises the totem pole. I don't know. Mechie's the hot name. Everyone's talking about Mechie. Like, Xavier Hutchinson only has 10 targets this year. Mechie has 5. Mechie had 1 target before last week. 1. The guy's not playing. He will have to play more now, but you run so many risks with Mechie. First of all, Robert Woods played a little bit. You look at their snaps, Mechie was still behind Robert Woods in snaps. And that's something that's important to this team. They're very run heavy. Woods is just a better blocker than Mechie. Hutchinson's just a better blocker than Mechie. Normally that doesn't matter for a receiver, but it matters here. This team ran significantly more 12 personnel once we had Stephon Diggs off the field. Cade Stover played 34 snaps. Tegan Catoriano played 24. That was in addition to Dalton Schultz playing 47 himself. It's way above 100% of the snaps at tight end. And then, like, when it's two wide receivers, Mechie's not on the field. It's Xavier Hutchinson. So, I mean, there's just a ton of problems with Mechie. I'll be monitoring his ownership very closely through the day. He's the very hot talking point right now. Everyone wants to play like the shiny new toy, even though Mechie has sucked every time he's been on the field. So I don't know, man. If people don't play Mechie, I'm going to have more interest just with the uncertainty. But right now, it seems like a lot of people are going to be going to him, and I would rather just pivot from a player that stinks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a super strong lean on who's going to be the guy. So with that in mind, my preference is probably going to be who is the lower owned of all the wide receivers that also is going. I mean, they're all fairly cheap, but the one that I'm getting to the most right now is Robert Woods, Matt. And if I was playing a single entry lineup right now and just had to enter a single entry lineup, considering all the information that we know as of 10:42 a.m. Eastern time, and I'm playing one of the Houston Texans value pass catchers in that lineup, I personally would go to Robert Woods. What would be the button that you would click? Would it be Woods or would you go to one of the other guys?
I think it would be Hutchinson, but he's more expensive. So you have to like toe this line. If you don't have the 1,000, I'm fine playing Woods. I have no problem with that. He just has some of the same concerns that Mechie has. And that's part of the problem is like these guys have a pretty strong overlapping skill set, especially Hutchinson and Woods. And they've already played Hutchinson like far ahead of Woods. I don't know. It's tough to really parse this. And people will say like Xavier Hutchinson also sucks. I mean, whoever was playing wide receiver 3 for this team once Nico went down was not going to earn targets over Diggs, Dell, and Schultz. It just is what it is. What I will say is Hutchinson being on the field over Mechie the entire season is telling to me Mechie was inactive the first 3 games. So I don't really know. I don't think Mechie is the answers, especially if people are playing him. Now watch him go out and have a big game.
Yeah, so Mechie is currently pulling the most. Well, actually, we got Hutchinson 16%, Mechie also 16%. So it's like pretty close. We'll see what that looks like later on in the day, and we'll be covering on Live Before Lock tonight as well. But one of the other things as well that we should talk about as far as Houston is concerned, which you had talked about, is we haven't really seen a big game out of Dalton Schultz or big season out of Dalton Schultz so far. He was a big free agent acquisition, and there was a point in time where I was doing best ball drafts this year, Matt, and I was looking at the Houston pass catchers. And I'm like, how are all of these guys getting picked so high? You had Nico Collins was like a second round pick. Then you had Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. They reached like third, fourth round picks. And then you had Dalton Schultz, who was not nearly as highly drafted, but still he was like, what, like an 8th or 9th round drafted tight end. It was like, how is there going to be enough just passing output to support all these guys? The answer clearly was that there wasn't, because other than Nico Collins, really none of them have lived up to the draft expectations. Even Nico Collins has fallen by the wayside due to the injury. But now I kind of circle back to looking at Dalton Schultz, and it's all right. Tank Dell is somebody who we could feel pretty good about being the wide receiver 1 for Houston. But then as you start to look at the other guys, there's some uncertainty with some of the cheap options. I think this is where Dalton Schultz starts to get more involved. He's also pretty favorably priced on DraftKings and FanDuel right in that mid-range. So relative to salary, Matt, even though I think that the number 1 guy is going to be Tank Dell, the one I think I'm going to end up with the most exposure to is Dalton Schultz because of a combination of where he's priced. And then also, I think this is finally the time that we're going to see more offense dedicated towards him, drawn up plays and effort to get him targets. Because if not now, then when? Like, why'd you even sign Dalton Schultz in the offseason if he's not going to get work with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs both out?
I agree with you. And he has at least 6 targets in 3 of the last 4 games, which is pretty good output for a tight end. This started happening when we lost Nico Collins, and now losing Diggs can't make this any worse. Efficiency, you could certainly call that into question with the offense as a whole. But yeah, to your point on the Texans this offseason, people just assumed that because they went out and signed Diggs, this team would pass more, even though they've never done that once in their current offense. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of an oversight, I think, and it stemmed down to Dalton Schultz. But anyway, I agree with you that he's one, if not one or two in terms of preference. I'm still not sure where I would go between him and Tank. I think there's a chance that Tank just has a monster target share moving forward, at least until Nico comes back. But I want to ask you, like, about these secondary tight ends. Cade Stover played more snaps than both Robert Woods and Mechie. He's been doing that. He has the same amount of targets as Mechie over the last 2 games. They're going to run more 12 personnel just by default, and they've had to do this anyway because their O-line has been leaky. Dude, I might honestly prefer Cade Stover over Mechie in these guys. This will be determined throughout the day, largely based on where ownership comes in. But man, I don't hate Cade Stover, and I'm kind of just looking for whoever goes overlooked in this Texans pass catching offense because there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah, let's see. I assume he's projected for very low ownership, especially comparably. So I'm just refreshing. We got a data update while we were on the show. So looking to
I'll rerun too.
Where that has them. And I see Jordan pulled it up right now as well. So we have, it was of 3 minutes ago. So brand new, fresh ownership. Haven't gotten a chance to look too much at the ownership that came out 3 minutes ago here. But we have Stover projected for actually more than I was expecting, 11%. So not like non-existent, but a little, like I thought he was going to potentially be like 3, 4, 5% owned. 11% at 1,600. I think he'll make his way into some of my lineups, but maybe not like the crazy contrarian play I thought he was going to be when he first brought him up a second ago.
Yeah, same. And ownership is going to shape a lot of this. Situations that are uncertain like this, I think ownership should play a role. Basically, what it tells us is that maybe the field is going to be confident on somebody that doesn't really have a sample, and maybe they shouldn't be confident in, and you can exploit that with the ownership game. Our sims do a great job of this. Like sometimes we've had these situations and then you run the sims and it either agrees with you or disagrees with you, but you can use that as a backstop, which is really nice. So I'm currently running it. I'm very curious to see where Stover comes in the portfolio.
Yeah, so updated ownership now. We've got Stover at 11%, Robert Woods at 9%, Xavier Hutchinson 19%, John Mechie also at 19%. This actually makes me feel better about Robert Woods because when I was talking before, I was like, I really don't know what to make between Hutchinson, Mechie, or Robert Woods. The idea that I could get Robert Woods, who is cheaper than Hutchinson and about the same price as Mechie, but for a little bit less than half the ownership, I think I just want to play the ownership game and go to Robert Woods more often than the other ones. And then still, same remains for a single entry when I said Robert Woods is the guy that I'd want to be playing over those other two. And then for FanDuel purposes, here's where things are different because Xavier Hutchinson is 10K on FanDuel. That is a big price point to pay for him. They've really aggressively priced him up due to the injuries there. So 10K, that's a steep price point. Then you've got Mechie is at 7,500 and Robert Woods down at 7K. So it's going to be the same for me over on FanDuel, where Robert Woods is going to be the guy that, at least as of right now, I gravitate towards a little bit more. But yeah, what do you make of Xavier Hutchinson being 10K on FanDuel, Matt? Because that is a big price point.
Yeah, it provides a different slate dynamic. I'm just paying down and probably not getting much of him over there. He shouldn't be that expensive. It's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
What is Schultz? I'm running the sim right now, so I forgot and I don't have it in front. Schultz is like 8.5 or something, right? Or 9?
Schultz on FanDuel is only 8K. So he's like,
see, that is egregious.
And he's not even crazy popular, 28% ownership.
That's wild. I guess FanDuel is a little softer. Maybe you just don't flat out need them. I'm trying to run this right now, so we'll see where it comes in. But it gives me a lot of interest in Schultz on FanDuel, and I can't really see playing Hutchinson outside of extremely large field.
Yeah, and Scooby in the chat said, you guys on the panel should put your best bets and picks so the viewers can see it. Not a betting show. This is a DFS show. So don't really have best bets to give out or anything. If you are just looking for DFS information, we've got, all of our data on the screen, but also keep in mind that some of this is going to change later on the day. It's not like if Matt and I were to build a lineup right now, it'd be the exact same one that we want to play later. So just kind of doing like a first look at some of the player projections, ownership projections, the sims, and then later on the day, I'm going to be doing live before lock with Spags, which I'm really excited about. We'll have some new creative ways to probably make fun of Eric while he's not paying attention. So tonight, live before lock, myself and Spags, Halloween night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. It's when the show is going to be starting today. A little bit of an overlap between NBA and NFL. Any other pass catchers from the Texans side that we haven't talked about yet that are important to you, Matt?
Important, probably not, but Tegan Kitoriano ran 7 routes in the last game. That was only 2 behind Robert Woods and Mechie. Obviously, Diggs playing half the game influences that a little bit, but I don't know. Millie Maker style, large field tournaments. He's a guy that should be on your radar. I don't think anyone else plays for the Texans at receiver, at least he snaps. So I think that about does it. But Kitoriano and Stover, anticipating them getting some work because of the 12 personnel this team will run.
Let's talk about the Jets pass catchers. And there's kind of this expectation when they traded for Davante Adams where it's like, oh my God, look at all the riches in the Jets offense. They've got Davante Adams, they've got Garrett Wilson, they've got Breece Hall. And it seemed like it was just, like a Pro Bowl roster of skill position players, and just hasn't been the case. Crazy inefficiency for Davante Adams. So far, Adams, since getting traded to the Jets, 15 targets, he's caught 7 of them for 84 yards. Is this a case of Davante Adams being on a new team, in your opinion, Matt? Is it him being older? Is it Aaron Rodgers being older? Is it all of these things together in the same bucket? What do you make of Adams and his lack of fantasy upside with the Jets to this point? And how is that going to impact what you want to do with them in Showdown tonight?
Yeah, to diagnose the Jets' problems, it's tough because they have so many problems. Obviously, Nathaniel Hackett being the OC originally this year wasn't a positive. He's been a failure everywhere he's been, but it's probably the Aaron Rodgers offense anyway. Rodgers likely calling a lot of the plays. Regardless of whether it was Hackett, who's now been demoted, or Rodgers, they're running a 2012 offense. Very little motion. It's basically just ISO ball on the outside, which worked for Rodgers in the past. But the problem is Davante Adams is now north of 30. Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old. And you have an offensive line that's been very shaky this year, even though it probably shouldn't be. On paper, this was an excellent offensive line, but it just hasn't lived up to expectations. So Rodgers has been pressured. He's been hit a lot, and now he's dealing with multiple injuries, which doesn't help a quarterback that's already pretty immobile. Now you have Garrett Wilson battling Davante Adams, just a much younger, more spry receiver. It's all been a mess. And for DFS purposes, having Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams just muddles the situation quite a bit, where I think both are upside is capped. Like the best case scenario was that 20 target game we saw for Wilson earlier this year where he barely eclipsed 100 yards. That's basically now out of the question for this offense. So I think they're both just a little expensive, but I wouldn't be surprised if either of them has a big game at any point this year. But I don't know, man. This is a disaster offense.
Yeah, so Breece Hall, clearly the priority as far as players I'm getting the most exposure to, running everything through in the Sims here. So Breece Hall, the priority spend up as far as the skill position players go from the Jets. It's not that I write off Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams, but I just get less than the field, where I've got Wilson in around 20% of lineups where he's projected for north of 30% ownership. Davante Adams in ownership in the teens when he's projected for about 30% ownership. And just instead prioritizing the running games for both teams over some of the passing games. If you had to roster one of them, Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams, you're building one lineup, would you feel better about clicking on Wilson or Adams? The price and ownership is comparable on both of them.
It's Garrett Wilson. He's seeing more volume than Davante Adams, even since he's come over. And maybe this changes because, Adams is a new addition to this team. But he has a lot of rapport with Rodgers over the years. I don't think that's really something that we should look at too much. Not worried about matchups for either of them, really. That's the thing about matchups. I see someone talking about that in the chat. Shadow coverage isn't really a thing in 2024. You're going to see some Stingley. You're going to see some Lassiter. It just is what it is. As far as the Texans defense, they're very strong up front. The biggest concern I think you have if you're a Jets fan is just Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter against this offensive line, which has been super leaky, getting after Rodgers quickly. And I don't think that benefits Wilson or Adams. They both can operate around the line of scrimmage and have. So, I don't know what clear matchup you'd be exploiting with this Texans defense. They're going to get after Rodgers. They're going to do it quickly. You're hoping for one of these guys to accumulate PPR volume, but there hasn't really been one of them playing that role. It's been split. So I'm going to pick Wilson, just being younger. I think more talented at this point in his career and getting more targets, but I don't feel super good about it.
Yeah, and then let's see. Do we have a recent update on? Yeah, just Alan Lazard is going to be out today, and kind of surprised. I think probably one of the most surprising parts of the Jets passing game to me so far this year, Matt, has been Aaron Rodgers' just comfortability and relying on Alan Lazard despite all of the other talent on the offense. Does Alan Lazard being out with the chest injury, does that maybe change the equation for Wilson or Adams in any significant way? Or is there maybe a value pass catcher from the Jets who could be going overlooked?
It doesn't change anything for me. And I wasn't talking about Lazard for people that are confused. I was talking about Lassiter, Kamari Lassiter, their rookie corner, if that wasn't clear. So there it is. I'll enunciate for you even better. As far as this offense goes, without Lazard, we have Mike Williams back in our lives. I'm worried about him. I think he should be very clearly the wide receiver 3. I don't think the Jets are at the point in the season where they fully punt it off with him and go to Malachi Corley. If they keep losing games, I think at some point they're going to just put Corley on the field to get a look at him, the highly drafted rookie. But he's been very clearly behind those guys. And as you mentioned earlier, the Jets still, for whatever reason, believe they're in must-win mode. So I think you see Williams on the field as the wide receiver 3. As has been the case, he'll be pretty distant. But they did a good job with his price. So when you just look at routes run versus the price he's going to be at today, I think he's somewhat interesting as a value piece. I'm not sure if I'd rather play the Texans or him right now. But I mean, the price point is at least enticing for a player that's been largely uninvolved.
Yeah, and he's somebody who has had talent in the past, towards ACL in the offseason. It's clearly been a work in progress to get him back up to speed because he wasn't practicing in full leading into the season. He wasn't like a full participant in training camp all the way through. Then he was getting limited snaps to open up the year, where we only saw him getting not just the limited snaps, but even limited targets when he was on the field. So wasn't targeted at all in week 1. Week 2, he gets 1 target against the Titans, catches it for 19 yards. Then you see a little bit of uptick in workload for him as he probably got a little bit healthier, recovering from the torn ACL from last year. And then just it seems like he's getting up to speed. In comes Devontae Adams, and just then you've got nothing at all out of Mike Williams. No catches, no targets last week. 1 catch on 2 targets the week before against Pittsburgh. And then the game prior to Devontae Adams coming to the Jets, you got 3 targets out of Mike Williams, caught 0 of them for 0 yards, which, I mean, if you have 0 catches, you're probably going to end up with 0 yards. So Mike Williams ended up being unless you're like the Samaje Perine game where I got screwed on the lateral. If you remember this, Matt, which I didn't realize this was how receiving yards were accumulated in the stats. But do you remember the primetime game where there was like a 2-minute drill and Travis Kelce had a catch? He laterals it to Samaje Perine. He ran for first down. It was a really cool play.
Yes.
Samaje Perine, I had the under on his receiving yards. He hit the over by half a yard, and the lateral yards, they all count as receiving yards. So just saying that there's one particular way where a guy could have 0 catches and have receiving yards, and it has worked against me to lose a prop bet at one point in time this year.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Any other pass catchers from the Jets that are of interest to you, or is Tyler Conklin somebody you're considering?
Again, maybe you see Corley take on more of a role as the season goes on. I think the Jets are still trying to win games, so I'm not sure we really see that soon. It's probably just going to be a late season thing for them. He did play 10% of the snaps, and he hadn't played in the game in the 4 prior contests, so at least worth noting. Maybe he just plays at the expense of Mike Williams. But one thing they did do after losing Lazard, instead of playing Mike Williams in a full-time role, they played a lot of 2 tight end sets. Conklin was at 81% of the snaps last week. Jeremy Ruckert was at 37, and even Ferkser had a handful of snaps. But what this really does is put Conklin on the field every single play. He's a little too expensive for my liking. Hasn't eclipsed 4 targets in 4 straight games. And I mean, you do have to pay for him. He's not like he's at 4K or something like this. He's up at 5,600, which is in the range with the kickers and the defenses. So I'm not super interested in Conklin, but he is on the field every play. If you wanted a punt, Ruckert is out there a decent amount. Just mentioned his snaps. He had 23, mostly blocking, which is a problem, but at least he's out there somewhat. I still think I'd rather play Stover in the backup tight ends for Houston over him, though.
Fair enough. Yeah. And then, I mean, another thing, too, about Conklin, is he's not all that inexpensive. And we do have a lot of cheap pass catchers who I consider to be kind of comparable to him today. All the cheap guys that we talked about from Houston, for instance, even like Mike Williams, I'd say pretty comparable from a projection standpoint to Tyler Conklin. And you're getting these guys at, Tyler Conklin, we got projected for 6 fantasy points. And these other guys you're getting for $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 less expensive. So that's going to make it a little bit hard for me to want to click on Tyler Conklin for today. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the overall look at the slate relative to some of the other pass catchers that we have involved. Before we go ahead and start talking about kickers and defenses here, I want to let you guys know about one really quick deal that we have going on just for today. With it being Halloween, if you guys want to check out our new OddShopper Portfolio EV tools, it's just $1 to sign up. And that is with the promo code BOO. There's a link for that down below in the YouTube description box. That is BOO, BOO. And this is $1. It's going to give you a week access. And this is going to expire today. So if you want to check out our betting tools and for cheap, now is the time. It is going to be done tonight at midnight. So what is that? 13 hours from the time that Matt and I are doing the show right now. And then after the end of today, the $1 deal, it is gone. So this is going to be a great way to check out the new tools. We just had a new update that went live on the site yesterday. This is what I've been using for my NBA bets for a while now, ever since we came out with these tools. It's been a great start to the basketball season. And of course, we support hockey, we support football, both college football as well as the NFL in our portfolio EV tools. So just $1 if you want to try out our OddShopper betting tools that we have linked down below in the YouTube description box. Enter that promo code BOO to get access for just $1. Kickers, defenses, Matt, and we have a little bit of uncertainty here with the Jets kicking situation. Greg Zuerlein, he is out. We know that is going to be true, but we don't know exactly who it is that's going to be starting for the Jets at kicker. For right now, we're assuming Riley Patterson is the guy. He is who we ended up swapping Zuerlein out for and putting Riley Patterson into our projections. If it ends up that Patterson isn't the kicker, we'll adjust for that as well. But how important are the kickers for you today, Matt? Because they have just been killing it on showdown slates this season.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they're perpetually underowned. And it's a trend that we're on top of. We keep giving more kickers than the field, and other people continue to ignore them. In a game like this, the total's pretty modest. Kicking points are going to be a higher percentage of the total points, potentially, which leads to both of them. Obviously, Fairbairn should be the more talented guy in the field, but you have the higher implied team total for the Jets. Just kind of comes out on the wash. With a lot of uncertainty at the cheap positions, I think kickers are a pretty natural replacement. And then both defenses, I honestly have a little more interest in the Texans overall, which might be contrarian, but I think it'll come in pretty close either way. That pass rush going against the Jets offensive line and an immobile Aaron Rodgers is extremely enticing to me, even if the Texans haven't always had the best secondary this year. I think it's fine with Stingley and Lassiter. The Jets, they've honestly been a little disappointing on defense. They're fairly strong up front, but I mean, Sauce Gardner is straight up having a bad year. They have some injuries in the back end. You're facing CJ Stroud, and while he doesn't have 100% of his weapons out there, still the more talented quarterback at this point. Jets are cheaper, which I get, so they're going to give you a different construction. They still have paths to winning this game, and that helps your defense. But I think I'm a little more interested in the Texans.
Yeah, and then, I mean, also, if you look at the Jets defense, to your point there, Matt, like, this is a team that was just kind of assumed was going to be one of the better defenses in the NFL this year, and they're 20th in DVOA, so it's not like this is the worst defense in football or anything like that, just relative to expectations, or the thought was that this was going to be a top 5 defense, maybe like a top 10 defense at worst. Nobody thought this would be a below average defense considering all the talent they have. So that's really where this team has been a massive disappointment. Like, I really do understand the logic of it being like, hey, the Jets are going to have an elite defense coming into the year. They've gotten nothing out of the quarterback position the last couple of years. Last year was a competent team with nothing out of the QB position. If Aaron Rodgers is just okay, the team should be better. But what ends up happening is Aaron Rodgers has not really been okay. The defense has massively regressed. As a result, you have a team that's 2-6, and only 2 wins have come against New England Patriots and the Tennessee Titans, who are 2 of the worst teams in football. So no quality wins at all for the Jets. And a big issue has just been this defense has not held up their end of the bargain of what was expected coming into the season. The only reason that I would say maybe I have a preference, with all that said, for fantasy purposes to play the Jets instead of the Texans is just because I have a little bit more confidence in the Texans taking some more chances throwing the football, whereas the Jets offense has been so conservative with Aaron Rodgers, and for defenses score fantasy points, it's relying on sacks, it's relying on turnovers. And I think that could be a little bit more likely on CJ Stroud taking chances than Rodgers. But I mean, Rodgers has had some pretty shitty games this year as well. But I'm getting to a little bit more exposure right now to the Texans defense than the Jets. But I could see myself doing an ROI boost to the Jets to get them in a little bit more lineups. But this is another slate, kind of like what you and I had talked about on Monday Night Football, Matt. Kickers and defenses look really good again. We're just kind of waiting on who is the confirmed kicker for the Jets. But honestly, it's not like whether it's Greg Zuerlein being out, Riley Patterson, or whoever else the Jets end up going to. It's just a kicker, and it doesn't make any massive change in their projection in any way.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the reason the Jets have been so bad is injuries. Both their safeties are hurt. You had Sauce Gardner take a step back. DJ Reed's still been just fine for this team. CJ Mosley's been hurt. Obviously, there was the holdout with Hassan Reddick. He came back. He had 0 tackles and just 2 QB pressures. He hasn't played in a while, so perhaps that gets better. But I mean, he was expected to come in and be a huge part of that defensive line. So they've had to rely on guys like Will McDonald, just not there at this point in his career. It's kind of just like Quinnen Williams is a baller, and I guess DJ Reed as well. Everyone else has been hurt or disappointing. So I don't know. It's a lot of reasons the Jets are having problems this year. Just another one on a long list of them with the defense.
Well, it's a fun Thursday night football game because running the Sims, I am currently overweight to Fairbairn, Patterson, the Texans defense, and the Jets defense, Matt. And I'm totally cool with that. I think that's perfectly fine and reasonable to me. I'm cool with rostering these guys. Same when you and I did the Monday Night Football show. What happened? We were like, we're going to play kickers. And then we're watching the game, we're rooting for Chris Boswell field goals, and it came through. That's what we got. We got Greg Joseph and Chris Boswell. Scores 9-9 at halftime. Perfect. I would love that to happen again for today. Kickers, defenses. Is that also something that you're going to be leaning pretty heavily on today?
Yeah, and I guess to explain it X and O's wise, you have a ton of uncertainty at the wide receiver position for both teams. And it's kind of the tight end has to be lumped in there because a lot of the 12 personnel stuff that these teams are using. So, I mean, let's say you pick Xavier Hutchinson over a defense. Well, first of all, you're gambling Xavier Hutchinson is going to be on the field, and there's a lot of reasons he might not be. 12 personnel, maybe they want to get a longer look at Mechie. Maybe they think Robert Woods is more valuable as a blocker. You have a couple bets that need to go right there. Then if you get that bet right and he's on the field, you still need him to be targeted and other players to succeed around him like CJ Stroud. You're making a ton of bets. Whereas if you play Fairbairn, he's just kicking all the extra points and kicking the field goals and he's good. So I don't know. You're making far fewer bets. The projection is just straight up better even when you price adjust. And people hate playing kickers for whatever reason. And I kind of get the psychology. They want to gamble on the new shiny toy. They're like, oh, what if Mechie is 120-2 and breaks the slate? I get it. It's just super unlikely. And yeah, a kicker's probably not going to put up a 25-point score like Mechie could. But man, people take this way too far, in my opinion.
We see this all the time in our sims. And also, if you guys ever look at our single lineup sim for the top plays tool for the showdown slates, just about, it's not always the case, but just about every single Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Thursday Night Football game, you will see that in our simulations, kickers drastically underrun. Sometimes defense underrun, but almost every single slate, kickers are showing up as the best plays in our data and tools. Then the games start, kickers making a bunch of field goals, and then immediately people on Twitter upset, like, how is this a kicker slate? Why is it a kicker slate? It's always a kicker. Every slate's a kicker slate, guys. That's just the way a lot of these showdown ones have gone. So I recommend playing the kickers more often than not. Is it going to win 100% of the time? No, but I don't know. What is it winning this year? Like 80% of the time? Kickers, defenses. This looks like another good slate for those kinds of lineup builds. Matt, any final thoughts before we close out the strategy show?
Overarching thought is that ownership is going to shape a lot of the bottom end of my lineups, the cheap guys in my lineups. And that'll be something that just needs to be monitored throughout the day. If it comes in, one of these receivers is super underowned, I'm going to get more. If not, I'll be playing a lot of kickers and defense. That will be determined throughout the day, as it should be for you too. Make sure you stay up to speed with the updates. We always have them.
And with that said, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have not done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget about the sales we have going on right now. Links are down below in the YouTube description box. If you want to sign up for any of our NFL DFS packages, promo code MILL, MILL, 30% off. And then also, if you want to sign up for our betting tools, promo code BOO over at Portfolio EV, just $1 to get a week access, and that is going to be expiring tonight at midnight. So if you don't take advantage now, that deal is going to be going away. But guys, thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later tonight. Peace out.